commons.
When we talked today about commons, that were the questions.
Yeah, because like we had this, to make a brief summary, we had this morning session where we discussed about the commons, social movements and human rights. We had greatly discussed about social movements and human rights with Professor Blokker and Frankenberg, and we also discussed about the commons, but more in, I would say, in with relation to social movements and human rights. So we not, I think, deeply face the problem of the commons as the definitional problem of the commons, and also on the other hand, the problem of the commons in terms of governance. So I think that the questions and the problem that raised during this session today, both afternoon and morning, were more about with relation to the commons, and the theory of the commons, and they're more of a legal perspective were more related to these two aspects. So first of all, some people raise the problem of the definition, in the sense that not having an actual definition of the commons who weakens these two, and on the other, the problem of governance and exclusion, in the sense that after we say that a given good has to be governed as a common, it automatically implies a community. And so how do we define this community, and how this community could run the risk to exclude others, and so therefore kind of imply similar problem as to the ones which are implied by private property. I think that can be a kind of a first step of the discussion we had this morning, and the most problem that has been raised.
Okay, let me first of all, sorry for being late, but I was around trying to do stuff with the commons, in fact. I think of these issues that you have approached, the one of the definition and the one of the exclusion are not that crucial. I mean, they are important, we can discuss them, they are what people always discuss, but that is really pretty much a sort of, how to say, infantile disease of everybody who starts thinking about the commons. You know, you want to start about think about something different and new, and you just fall down in the usual kind of categories. For example, the category of definition. You know, I'm trying to discuss and to develop a legal idea of the commons because the law works with definition, because the law works with actually definition that determine rules. Okay, we kind of believe that we need also definition of the commons so that we can determine rules. But this issue of the definition is very contextual and historical itself, and it implies a vision of the legal system that, to me, is completely outdated. The idea is, you know, you need a definition if you assume that the legal system is something that exists out there. Okay, the law isn't out there, and therefore you need a definition so that the concepts that are out there can be known by someone who is a social actor who is actually determined by that context that is out there. The vision of the law is today is different. I think that we have a very much more dynamic vision of the law as a product of social and political dialectic, that we cannot really think that the law is out there. There's not such a thing as a law as a community of interpreters. There is not such a thing as the law without someone who determines and defines it by either obeying to it or disobeying to it. So it seems to me that the definition of the commons is a non-issue if we get a vision of the law that is realistic enough. Okay? And in fact, what we say is, well, the commons are not defined ex ante. They are recognized by a process of political engagement into them. So whenever kind of a community or a group recognizes something and believes that it's worthwhile struggling for something and opening an issue with something, that something, the moment in which is, so to say, producing a collective subjectivity, becomes a common. Okay, so nothing is a common in the domain of in an ontological domain. There is not something as a common in the sense that this table is a table. Actually, this table can be a common, or can be a private table, or can be a commodity. Okay, It becomes a common in the moment in which this table acquires, for example, a symbolic meaning for a community that believes really important to stay around this table and taking care of this table and believes that this table should be at the center of the places wherever something happens, okay? So that is a matter of collective recognition and the birth of collective subjectivity related to something that is a social relationship. So definition, I'm not interested so much into that. Of course, you know, then the commons movement in Italy, in a way, began with a legal process of trying to reform the civil code, and when you try to reform a civil code, then you need a definition. But what made the commons a big deal in this country certainly was not the definition of the code, it was the political process around the referendum on water as a commons and the sharing of a certain kind of vision about the relationship with these commodities and commons and so on and so forth. So on the definition side, we have a few. I mean, we can come up with definitions. Usually they are kind of connected with the idea of fundamental rights. Usually they are connected with the idea of access. Usually they are connected with the idea of future generations. So there are a bunch of, so to say, topoi that appear all the time when we talk about the commons, but is not really a definition in the sense that is any strict at all. Also because as lawyers we know very well that the definitions really don't matter so much, realistically. They matter if you try to build a system, but how much does the definition of ownership matters in practice? You know, the sole and despotic dominion to use of something, you know, that an individual has of an object is a definition, but is then compatible with a large number of things. Okay, so this would be I would dismiss the point on definition, and many people say that I've been too dismissive of this, but actually I kind of enjoy being dismissive of things that I believe should be dismissed. First point. Second point, I'm also very dismissive, is the one on community, on inclusive versus exclusive communities. Because this is a very, very dangerous strategy of the dominant discourse to delegitimize the commons, okay? Whenever something is kind of unknown, or whenever something is kind of, when we perceive that is radically alternative against a certain vision, then you try to delegitimize it, okay? So, it's community, therefore it's obscurantistic, is medieval, is sexist, is patriarchal, is, whatever. So you kind of construct the idea of community in a very community-phobic vision. And community phobia is actually what was the strategy, the most important strategy of modernization, to impose enclosures, to impose extraction, to impose concentration of power, to consider civilized only those that believe that private property is the way in which the Napoleonic Code defines it, and so on and so forth. However, okay, so said that, let me shift a little. So let's be very, very suspicious of those that come out saying, it's a community can be exclusive, because it is true that it can be exclusive. But think about it. I mean, the alternative to the commons is a structural exclusivity. Ownership is defined as exclusion. And we build the legal system on a definition of ownership that has exclusion as a default rule. And I'm talking very technically now, okay? So the owner can exclude unless something precludes him the possibility to exclude. The state can exclude as a sovereign unless there is something that takes it away the possibility to exclude. Okay? And indeed, they both do that. As an owner, I say no trespass. As an owner, I want cash to allow you to pass in front of my street. As an owner, I want $8 to let you park in front of my parking garage when there is the soccer match. Okay? So as an owner, I exclude by definition, and I try to exclude as much as possible. Of course, I don't exclude if there is a regulation that you don't exclude. But the default rule is exclusion. This is true of political sovereignty as well. The state excludes. Citizenship is a notion of exclusion. I'm the citizen, you're not the citizen. You are the foreigner, you're out. Okay? I can accept you, but you have to prove this, this, and this. So we are talking about notions and categories that have institutionalized exclusion for at least 400 years. And we have organized a whole legal system around exclusion. Okay? And now you come to a guy that says, oh, you know what? I want to try to organize a vision of the law that is against exclusion and against concentration of power. Okay? Because the commons is the opposite of exclusion. It's based on inclusion. And is based on diffusion of power. And you say to the guy, oh, you exclude. Who are you to tell me that I exclude? I'm trying hard to include. Okay? So the commons has inclusion as the default rule. The community that is common in something has internalized the vision that they should be inclusive. And that they actually are inclusive unless there are special reasons to say that they should exclude. So it's a complete reversal of the default rules. Okay? Then there are pathologies. There are communities that might exclude more than we like. You know, there are communities that might, we can still use the law to limit certain possibility to exclude, as long as we put inclusion as a value within the legal system. Okay? So again, you see, this is really pretty much of a matter of discourse. You want to delegitimize my discourse on the commons, you tell to me that I exclude, when I'm trying hard not to exclude. Whereas you have a system that actually excludes by definition. So I want to be treated on the same grounds on other institutions. Okay? State and property exclude. The commons might exclude. Sure, they might exclude. But they certainly don't exclude more than the other ones, and actually they struggle to exclude less. This would be my answer to that. Plus, you know, the idea of the community, the community that excludes is a lot an invented tradition. There are certain crazy people in Italy, for example, that are called the Northern League, that they say, oh, we should be the next community. But those are not real communities. Those are invented, those are political ideologies. The African community doesn't exclude, for example. African villages that are usually pointed at as like the ultimate model of exclusion in a pre-modernized society. In fact, they don't exclude at all. They look for marriages outside of the group. A community needs to open up in order to survive. There is a big self-interest in real communities to open up. And in fact, you know, pre-modernization cultures are much more inclusive and much more hospitable and much more, you know, open to foreigners that arrive than we are in our modern, you know, enlightened vision based on individualism. Everybody who has an experience in Africa, everybody will be shocked at how nice and hospitable and inclusive the people are with someone who is traveling, you know. And actually, I'm always ashamed of the way in which we treat the African when they arrive here compared to the way they treat me when I go there, okay? And communities, actually, real communities, I don't believe, I challenge empirically the fact that real communities exclude. Because actually communities function as networks. They need to connect with other communities. They need to exchange with other communities. Marriage is a big example, you know. The idea that a community always tries to have marriages happening with different communities, not inside, because you need to build up a network. So there is a lot of ideology in the critique of community to me. A lot, because, you know, community sounds a little bit like communism, is a scary term, is very much against individualism, and remember, individualism is what capitalism likes. Alone, we are better consumers. There is no question about that. And therefore, everything that can produce, you know, individuals that are not alone is scary. So the third point, and I'm sorry I've been a little long, but the third point is to me, is a much more interesting question. And is actually the issue of governance. Okay? How do you actually create governance systems that are coherent with the vision of the commons? Okay? How do you do that? Assuming that I don't want to exclude. Assuming that I want to diffuse power. Assuming, however, that I want to propose the commons as an institutional setting that is not an alternative to, that is not limited to the small village or urban farming or little kind of trendy activities of spoiled Western individuals living in cities, but I want to have that as an alternative to the global corporation. I want to use the commons not as an alternative to something very local, but I want to have the commons as an institutional setting that works better than a public traded corporation in building cars, or in not building cars, or building something else, or in running water plants, or in running electricity systems, or in running transportation, airlines, whatever. I want an institution of the commons that have a governance system that can work better than an alternative based on extraction, because it is based on different principles. And so we need to find out, and this is really an open research plan, we need to find out ways in which the DNA of the commons, what the commons are in terms of their intimate, institutional structure, can be actually translated into actual institutional settings with governance. And the example is always the same. If you have a publicly traded corporation and you are in the board of directors, and I'm in the board of directors, and she's a board of directors, what we have to do in the board of directors is to make the shareholder values increase. Period. Okay, this is what we are paid for. This is what we are under an obligation to do. We need to maximize the shareholder value. Of course, then we have to obey the law, and therefore if there are laws that requires me to do certain kind of decent things, we'll do that. But if there are not those laws, I will just go for the bottom line, which is try to maximize my returns. That's out of the question. If I'm in the board of directors of a commons institution, I need to have different kind of obligations, okay? I need to have factored in the structure of the common different kinds of obligations that are obligations to the stakeholders, that are obligations to the future generations, that are obligations to the environment, that are obligations to the need to include more people in the running of that business. So I have a different charter, okay? I have a different corporate charter that includes those kind of things, to which I'm bound. As an official of a corporation, doesn't matter if I'm a good guy or a bad guy, I might well be an asshole, but when I'm sitting there, I'm under a legal duty not to act as an asshole, but to act as a good person, because my charters obey me to act as a good person. Exactly in the same way that if I sit in the board of a corporation, even if I am a very good guy, I'm anyway obliged to behave as an asshole, because I need to maximize the value. And if I don't do that, someone will sue me, okay? Because I'm not following my obligation as a member of the board. So we have to introduce charters of the commons institutions that are capable to introduce those kind of obligations. And then we need to introduce ways to check that the board functions in that particular line of thought. This is why, for example, the trust is a very good potential institution for the commons, because you can create in the trust bylaws, in the trust instrument, you can introduce all sorts of obligations to future generation, to the environment, to social housing, whatever, and the trustees have to do that. And if they don't do that, they can be removed. Okay, so that is a good possible institution for the commons that has some governance structure that works. Now, the point I'm just struggling with as we are talking now, in these days, is what if someone tells you, okay, now you run a theater as a common, okay? So I have to go down on Monday, I have to go down to Rome, because the mayor of Rome has summoned me to tell him in practice, what would we do with the Valle Theater, which is the famous theater, which is a common that the mayor last week threatened to evict. Now there has been a very big international attention on that. There is a document that went out that is signed by a lot of big dogs and stuff to say, okay, should be run as a common. And so the mayor of Rome, the day before yesterday, said, okay, have to run it as a common, the lawyers should do that. I call Ugo and I ask him how to do that, okay? So now I have 2 days to think, in practice, something that is feasible according to, of course, according to Italian law, because you cannot go out there with, but which is actually a common in the sense that it doesn't denaturate what is a common now. I mean, right now the Valle is certainly a commons institution, okay? It's a commons institution that works with an assembly, is a very informal common, is based on a lot of sharing, is based on a lot of people living together, is based on a lot of people doing stuff together, believing in the same thing, struggling for something together. So it's a common in the real sense. There is a community that cares, there is work, there is real commoning, this is going on, okay? These guys are tired, because this is all people that has a life, and they would like at some point, to move on. It's been 3 years now that the thing has been going on that way, so they have a life. And on top of that, even if they would like to stay in the same way as they are, the mayor said, okay, I'm gonna kick you off, okay? Unless we find out a way to legalize what's going on, because they're saying, okay, not only is it illegal because it occupies, but it's illegal also because it doesn't pay the dues to DCI, which is the company that the national, how do you define it? The National Agency for Copyright, and so they don't pay the dues to that. They don't pay this, they don't pay that, they don't do the security standards, the kind of stuff that the public should do. And if you are occupying a place, you just don't have time to do that, okay? And you don't have the skills, and you don't give a damn anyway, okay? So they don't keep the books, everything is informal. Now, so it's a common, it's informal. Is there a way we can make it become formal in some minimum sense? And the minimum sense being so that the mayor of Rome and the municipality of Rome doesn't have the political strength to kick them out, okay? Is there a way to make it formal that doesn't make it become not a common anymore? Which is pretty much what the Brits had in front of them when they went down there to try to codify customary law in Eastern Africa, okay? Customary law in Eastern Africa was working very well exactly because it was not written. Exactly because it was extremely flexible. Exactly because the community was actually a place in which you would adapt to the different circumstances. The moment in which you try to write it down, you introduce a level of strictness, a level of, so that changes nature, okay? So here it seems to me that we are a little bit in a similar dilemma, okay? Because I have experience in Naples of the company that was transformed, quote unquote, into a common structure, but there we were starting from a place that was not a common at all. That was a corporation, very vertical, with a big dog in the top, with the directors, the assistant directors, assistants, a hierarchy, okay? And then we had to try to change a hierarchy into a common, and what we had there was a problem that we changed the bylaws, and we changed everything, but then the culture of the place remains very hierarchical. So it's very difficult to say, okay, from tomorrow, Fiat Corporation is going to be run as a common. And all these people have been there, they spent all their life obeying to the orders of the top, they have no kind of shared responsibility, they don't really care about the outcome of the results, because it's, so it's very difficult to change the culture of someone who's been framed as someone within a privatized hierarchy to become a commoner. That's very difficult. But it's also difficult to make someone who is a commoner, like the kids at the Valle, to become formalized. So this is what I consider the issue of governance. Okay? Can we figure out a way to run a place as a common that makes it running in a sort of little bit more predictable way, perhaps, paying the taxes, doing those kind of things, perhaps keeping some books, kind of becoming integrated part in a certain way of the formal legal system, without nevertheless losing the strength, the soul, the heart, the bodies, the people that are actually doing that. How do you do that? And so I'm kind of thinking, all sort of complicated mixtures. We've been thinking about those in the Cavallerizza, which is another place here in the last few days. It's not easy. It's not easy because solutions, they are disliked both by the power and by the occupants. Okay? it's like it's very difficult because each one is invested, and actually rightly so in a way from his point of view, in a certain particular vision. But when you try to introduce a political solution and a legal solution of a certain kind, it's very difficult to make it accepted by both. And also it's very difficult to figure it out the way it would work. For example, I have clear that the Assemblea, the assembly, is extremely important and should be an institution to run the Teatro Valle. It should have an important role. But then, who would be the members of the assembly? Right now, the members is very easy. Whoever is there is there. Okay? And whoever is there is someone who is doing chores, is doing stuff, is actually putting his own work and energy and creativity in the process. So it's easy. It's there and it's always the same 50, 60, 70 people. There is a community. Now, the moment in which the Assemblea becomes a recognized institution with some power, and doesn't require maybe any obligation, such as the ones of being there and staying together, who can tell you that the day in which you open the open assembly, all the section of Garbatella of the whatever political party arrives there to vote and hijacks the dynamic, So you need to avoid those kind of things, which becomes much more likely in the moment in which there starts to exist some real power, which means, a place to run the money to deal with, and to control the board, to do this kind of things that an assembly can do. So how do you do that? See, this is a big question mark. How do you do that? Of course you say, okay, the assembly cannot be open to everybody anymore. Great. But what does it mean? Okay, what does it mean? Should I say only 150 people should be in the Assemblea? Then it comes, how do you decide them? And then, it's very, very difficult to deal with an institution that denies the power of representation, that says, okay, representation is not a good way to deal with politics, and then to try to make it function. So this is an issue that I'm thinking hard about. One possibility is maybe to say, okay, there are going to be, the Assemblea is limited to the number of the seats on the theater. There are 600 places, there should be 600 people that sit there. Now, how do you allocate the seats? Whoever arrives first, maybe you can say a first come, first served kind of thing. So if you are ready to go 5 days before the beginning of the official Assemblea and to actually occupy, then you vote. If you don't arrive there, I don't know. I mean, these would be some of the things that are on the ground that we have to deal with. Okay.
I think that the point that is being raised, it was the problem that we also discussed this morning about formal, informal, long-term, and the problem of formalization of the commons and the problem of institutions. So the formal institution, informal institution, and legitimacy. But I don't know, like if there is questions, other questions, otherwise I pick one of the questions that I think that you raised during the day. You have questions.
The issue of necessity, is it necessary now to like march?
Speak up, please.
Necessity, we raised the issue of necessity. Is it necessary now to like take commons as an alternative mode of property administration? Is it necessary or just an anticipatory move or strategy approach?
I think this, that the commons is a way for humans to mimic the way in which the planet has been surviving so far. Okay, so communities that are not human communities, animal, microbes, fishes, masks, whatever, whatever is alive. Whatever is alive functions as a network of communities and adapts to the environment. The human being is the only species that is actually capable to destroy its environment completely. No other species would do that. So there is clearly an issue of mimicking the way in which nature works and saying, well, okay, nature sustains itself and has the common as the fundamental building block, not the individual. The individual is a non-existing entity in biological life. Okay, so is this necessary? Is that not necessary? For example, Leonardo was mimicking nature all the time in his thoughts, and his idea was, okay, we can learn a lot from nature. Let's try to learn something, and right now it seems to me that we need to learn how to make this whole thing actually sustainable, because it's not anymore. We have all sort of data that show that the environment is fucked up. There is no way that the fisheries are depleted. We burn way too much carbon, fossils. Those things that we know very well. There is a friend of mine who came back from China, and he said that he'd never seen the sun in the city because of how polluted it was, day after day after day. So those things are there, okay, and are clear problems. So how early you want to solve them and how much we can procrastinate that is a big question mark. We know very well that usually by the end of July, we have already finished the capacity of the Earth to reproduce itself. And now, so we still have to leave September, October, November, December. Happens to the IUC all the time anyway, but so we are used to that. But and then something always happens. But in theory, it seems to me that there are all good reasons to start thinking alternative, because we know very well that the institutional model of extraction, which is the one we've been living with, has actually led us to a direction that we don't like at all. Okay, so necessity, probably not for my generation. I think I'm going to be dead anyway, much before the planet is going to then be dead itself. Maybe not even your generation, maybe 3-4 generations, I don't know. But it seems to me that if not necessary, is highly recommendable. I would say it's highly recommendable for human beings to start to consider that they are not above the laws of nature, that we are part of it, and we have to try to stick with the sense of limits. Yeah.
There's like a question there, I think.
Yeah. So two questions. One is informative and one is polemical. So the informative question is, you talked about trusts. I wonder if you're thinking about cooperatives. So the history of the cooperative movement, which seems roughly aligned with the commons movement. I wonder, as an institutional form, to what extent you draw inspiration from it. And the polemical question is a bit about jurisprudence and a bit about the discussion that we were having earlier on. So, for example, when you describe on the matter of definitions, that Carla asked, when you describe the neoliberal theory of property, right? You say, sole and despotic domain, we all know that it's not the way that things really work. Jurisprudentially, we've gone a long way from thinking about law this way, and we know that it's messy, that it's complicated, that there are all sorts of tags and pools, etc., etc. Now, when we return to the modern corporation, right, you actually seem to adopt a very different jurisprudence. It's no longer pluralism and relational contracts. Now we actually think of a modern corporation that is really a profit maximizer, right? It's not some institution that is living within a community, that is living within political constraints, that has employees and various type of unions and groups and its own politics. Now it is really the corporate analog of sole and despotic domain. It is really a machine profit maximizer. And now the commons is in some sense has to be an alternative to that, a formal alternative to that. So I'm wondering if you're picking up a different kind of jurisprudence depending on the context. I mean, maybe the difference between the commons and the modern corporation from a realist point of view is actually not such a huge, colossal difference. Maybe they have some commonalities.
Okay, let me put this way. I don't believe at all that I'm using a different jurisprudence. I know very well that the law actually, I mean, my jurisprudence is very basic and simple and actually unsophisticated. I think that the legal system simply works very well and smoothly for the advantage of whoever is already the stronger actor, okay? And therefore, the theory of property that emerged at the time of Sir William Blackstone was actually reflective of a reality of power relationships at the time that allowed the British landlord or the Italian or the padrone to actually be the despot of everybody would live in his land. I mean, there would be a real capacity of the bourgeois proprietarian order to actually function in a way that is coherent with the vision. If they had enough power to do that, okay? Of course, then there would be someone who wouldn't have enough power. There would still be the sole and despotic dominion, but the despot would find, some peasants that actually organize in trade union and might kill him, okay? Or the boss of the factory, of the early factory, might find some workers that actually unionize and struggle. And therefore, the theory doesn't correspond to the practice anymore. And the political process at some point, tries to or introduces certain kind of limits to the possibility of exploitation. This is historical. Okay? What I'm saying is that now, in the current days, when we are living now, the certain kind of corporations actually have so much concentrated power and such a strong capacity to exercise it in a way that is way stronger than the political process that we have been organizing it in liberal democracy, that we are back to a point in which there is some convergence between the ideology and the reality, okay? And so the idea of the corporation that is a very, very powerful maximizing machine and a machine of growth, even this idea of infinite growth that is big part of the current discourse, is actually an idea that becomes reality when it comes to corporations. Big corporations can grow forever. Big corporations can grow forever. They have no limit in growth. Whereas states do have limits, corporations don't. So I don't think that I changed jurisprudence. I just think that I was using examples to tell you that historical moments do determine and do work with theories and doctrines that actually reflect the ratio of power and tend to be, on the side of those that actually enjoy the power and describe the way in which they ought the world to be. I don't know if this was a tolerant answer or not. I'm not sure. But and whether whether a realist theory of the corporation, I don't think a realist theory of the corporation today. I don't know what you really mean. Do you mean things like burden means or stuff like that, or after that? I mean historical realist. Realist in the sense of historical American legal realism about the corporation, or realist in the sense that reflects a vision of the law that reflects what is the reality of the corporation today.
I'm very much both, right? So if we think of the reality of managing a corporation today, I think if to the extent that one's jurisprudence is critical, right? Just what we say of property, we say it's open-ended. There's never been a sole and despotic domain. So to that extent, maybe we might be in disagreement about the Blackstonian theory. Analytically, it's impossible to have sole and despotic domain. It's not a problem of power, it's a problem of analytics. You cannot create this creature. Yeah. To the extent that we think that about the corporation, again, the corporation simply cannot be a simple profit maximizer in the sense that a machine maximizes a number. It's an analytical impossibility. There are always different considerations.
Yeah, sure.
There are always different powers.
No, I agree, but
it's
true.
In a sense, it is a kind of commons.
Yeah. No, it's not a kind of commons.
Well,
it's grounded on exclusion and on extraction and on concentration of power. How can it be a common?
So at least in the
the CEO of the corporation is God in the corporation.
So corporate.
There is no right.
Corporate social responsibility, to some extent, maybe not so far from the commons. Or at least I would like to know. To me, it's an interesting question to understand from you how it's different from.
Because corporate social responsibility is something that is completely based on the maintenance of the current default rules and the current structure of decision making. Okay, so to me, when I say that there is a structural difference between the corporation and the commons, that I don't buy for a second the idea that the corporation is kind of a common, I would say that, first of all, in any commoning experience, the principle of equality and the principle of peerness is the dominating factor, not only in theory, but also in practice. Try to go into the common and try to be you do this, you do that, you do that. In a second, you're out of there with a big kick in your ass, because people simply don't internalize the idea that there is a superior and there is an inferior. So there might then be a relationship of de facto leadership and people that become more influential than others and all of that. Absolutely, I don't deny that. But structurally speaking, the idea that there is a hierarchy and this hierarchy has to be respected, and someone who is number 3 in the hierarchy cannot even dare to question the order of his superior, it seems to me that is pretty structural. So one is a collective decision making in the sense that it's the birth of a vision of a decision process that is actually created by a conference of free intellect on the same ground of peers, whereas the other is a hierarchy. So that to me is a pretty clear analytical distinction. Let alone the fact that then when you are in the corporate body, if you are in the corporation, you are in a competitive mood and you are kind of working. But it seems to me that is structurally, and that is because that is structural, is exactly where it makes it difficult to govern the commons outside of an actual physical sharing of the spaces. See, where it's actually very difficult to create and to reproduce in abstract form, as the law tends to be, relationships that have to be kind of egalitarian. This is to me is a dilemma. It's still a dilemma. Yeah. Also, on the other hand, we don't have to worry. We don't have to solve all of that. I mean, this whole idea that you have to have a theory for everything is very American. You can live very nicely without a theory for everything. You know, you can generate practices. You can you can make experiments. You can you know, participate in struggles. You can see what happens. You know, these things ultimately are collective processes. The idea that one theory of some guy has to unify everything in order to be credible, it seems to me that is very infantile. Yeah.
If I can connect to this last point, one question I raised today that I think is very connected and also which is very coherent with all the discussion we had before about constitutions, social movements and the commons. So you raised this problem of formal, informal, and that actually the commons have a kind of like uneasiness with the straight categories, state market, legal, illegal, formal, informal, and that it's and also with the current structure of decision making and so on and so forth. And and that is a thing which is very related to practice and to struggles and social movements. And so we also face this problem today of the commons as a constituent power, which we know because we read your article, which you believe that social movements of the common can be also thought as a constituent power. And so I think we would
what the constitutional lawyer said.
And that's why I was raising the question, because I think it would be very much related to what we discussed today and with Professor Frankenberg research.
Whenever he talks about the good stuff, that's him. When he talks about the law, he turns to me. I don't know what that means. But the law is good. No, actually, I must confess, I just for a minute I didn't listen, but I had one from what you said. I mean, this is all, of course, impressive and interesting and based on experience, and I guess the distinctions are right. But I guess one problem that you raised and that you're confronted with in Rome, as I understand, and that has to do with law, is the question of formality and informality. The question is, it's a little bit like pregnancy. Can you be a little bit informal and formal? And because I think the problem is not just a matter of degree, it could be really vicious, that once you start formalizing, then you lose the character of a common. And then my follow-up question would be, what makes it different from a corporation? Cooperation, I would say that's a different ballgame, but when I listened to you, I thought, what would be a good example to show, this afternoon we talked about ambivalence. So to show that even the commons might be an ambivalent phenomenon, not just purely good.
Yeah.
So I think, I thought maybe Mondragon in Spain, which I visited years ago, and I don't know whether it still exists, but I was really impressed. Why wouldn't that be very close to your idea of a common? And then, of course, I had another example which is pretty bad because it's also based on exclusion, but it has one aspect of it is good. It's the movie La Zona. It's about a gated community. I mean, if you for a moment forget the gated, I mean, because then but the idea that the community, it's more about, my point is what we talked about before, in terms of informality, formality, it's also what degree of institutionalization you can tolerate and need without sort of defeating your sort of the spirit and the purpose of a common. And in this movie, which I really recommend to everyone, is there's this gated community and they have this democratic structure and everyone discusses everything and they decide everything together. And then all of a sudden reality breaks in and they have a storm and kids crawl over the fence and they steal and somebody gets killed. And then it's just this incredible energy of they want to kill this boy, right? And then when I came out of the movie and I showed it in my class also, and you had the feeling, boy, really, we should have some sense of institutionalism, and that we need institutions. We cannot always trust that that it was more there about basic democracy than about the commons. So because it wasn't it was a common only for the people who lived there. But so my question to you is sort of how can you How do you cope with the question of formality, informality
I hate it.
related to institutionalization?
I don't know. I have it very, very clear. I mean, this is like stuff that I struggle with seriously. I mean, as serious as I can do things, which is very limited level of seriousness, but still. So it's very, very clear to me that there is that issue, and but I think that is a very. I mean, it's like something that we need to try. That we need to try in the reality. I mean, is that possible? Is it really true that you cannot be in the same institution, sometimes pregnant and sometimes not pregnant? You know, is it really true that I cannot work out a system of checks and balances between certain kind of decisions and certain kind of things that are certain parts of the game that are carried on completely informally, and certain others that are actually run in a formal way, and they can live together. For example, could we imagine in the case of the theater something that has to do with making it run and not fall down and not you know, and actually paying the bills and paying the taxes and doing, you know, the boring things, being something that is there and that works at the service of some some very creative and free and challenging and contested and revolutionary group of crazy people that actually do the part which is the creativity part that we want to be an avant-garde theater be about. Is that necessarily true that if we put these two things together, we could not have an institutional separation between what the boring guy of laws does in the administration, as opposed to the artist and the creative fellow, you know, that does with the performance. It is true that it's not going to be easy to be together, but if we are good enough in creating institutional checks and balances, if we are good enough in creating a, which I haven't answered to your first question, in creating a trust instrument, which to me the trust instrument is better than the cooperative for two reasons. First, because I'm Italian, and the co-op movement in Italy has been, no, I mean, has been great in the past, but now, I mean, it's not where you want to be, okay? And secondly, because it's, I think we need something that is at least as strong as real property. Okay, I like to have a property institution in the sense of trying to cure the imbalance between property rights and personal rights within the the trust works for that function. So that would be my idea about that. But maybe, you know, if we have a good bylaws and the system of checks and balances that works, and we kind of think creatively and we experiment for a while, maybe it is possible. You know, maybe I can say to the mayor of Rome, okay, you appoint a bunch of, we find a way to appoint a bunch of very good, smart managers that are capable of running a place with not much money, because we want also to have an example of a place that it doesn't cost a fortune, but is run properly, it's run soberly, it's run in a certain way. However, you have to cope with the fact that in this place there is going to be crazy people around, and producing and doing and you know, and that can, and you say to the crazy people around, you know, you just respect those kind of areas in which you don't understand nothing, and please stay out of there. It's like when we go to the occupation and everybody wants to talk about the law. You know, after a while it's really kind of when we were doing the water referendum, there was a moment, you know, in which everybody thought to be a big a lawyer. And so we were actually had to go. I actually had to go to the Constitutional Court to do the case, because we had to argue in front of the Constitutional Court, and there are some technical skills that you have to argue there. And they would get, you know, phone calls from militant people that would be like, you know, coming from any kind of background, telling me the way in which I should have written the brief. Okay. And it was I mean it was really annoying. You know, you could understand. Okay, now there is something that I'm not gonna tell you. You know how to dance. You're not gonna tell me how to do the brief in front of the Constitutional Court, because I spent a lot of time doing briefs, and you have spent a lot of time dancing, and there should be some division of labor. Okay, and this division of labor it should be respected. This is very difficult, because when it comes to the law, you know, because we have this democratic vision of the law, everybody thinks that and maybe it's good that everybody can talk about the law, right? So it's ultimi 5 minuti poi andiamo. Sì, perché tardi, sono
Sì,
tutte
tutto
tardi.
Maybe the key of the issue of governance is in a mix of both of you told. Before in the evening, the professor told about the expertise, the needing of expertise inside the social movement. What appears to be an unbalanced position between who got the expertise. In fact, for example, when you got an administrative procedure for build a nuclear power plant, you must to notify and let participate the stakeholders, all the people who got some interests. Maybe got his garden, his house in front of the power plant and everything, and the law set the procedure for get these people in. And the professor told a very interesting thing about the difference between the expertise. One side of the table, we got the corporate person, people who got sort kind of education, technical skill, and everything. Social movement, for their nature, not in every case got the same skills. So you got a sort of an imbalance. From which side you got a good idea without skilling, and the other you got very good skilling, but
It's also a matter of cash, you know.
yeah,
Because the skills cost money, and you know, most people are not militant and they want to be paid for work. So you know, like for example, a very simple example. There is like these big corporations that have cell phone business. They want to upgrade all the system of transmission and so on and so forth, you know, and they have, of course, their own strategy to develop the coverage of the territory and blah, 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 which certainly are driven by the interest of the provider. There is no question about that, okay? And so they will say, okay, I'm gonna put here this huge antenna in this kind of place because this is good for me, and maybe a municipality tries to say, no, you know, here is not a good place, why don't you do it there, you know? And they invariably sue. Okay, so basically what happens is that these people, they decide to do something, and they are capable to afford lawyers that are very good, very well paid, that actually kill you. If you try as a municipality to say you don't do this, you do that, you introduce this kind of prescription, this other prescription. And it's very difficult. So it's not that the movements don't have the skills. Also, the corporations don't have the skills. The difference is that the corporation can buy the skills. The movement cannot buy the skills because skills are something that costs on the market. If you have to defend a case in front of the Constitutional Court, you have to get a lawyer that is actually someone who knows how to do that, and it's not me. You know, I can support, I can help, but you need, you know, the guy who is the #1 practicing lawyer in the Supreme Court, in the Constitutional Court, which is a guy that couldn't give a damn about the commons, about this, about that. Doesn't give a shit. Gives a shit about how much you're paying him, you know, and you're just is a hired gun, but you need him. Because if you want to translate your intellectual discourse into a strategy that has some chances to win, you have to talk at least once or twice with someone that tells you, look, you know, focus on this, focus on that. I could not do it myself, you know. So it's a matter of money. It's a matter of money. Usually social movements don't have the money, and concentrated power does have the money. So I think that's a more...
No, but my point on the issue of governance was if, as an hypothetical theory, if the experience will be the key for construct a class, before you tell, you have to, for example, got this theater, is commons. They got 150 seats. So who, the person who come earlier have more right than come later. That if the key of the governance was the expertise, for example, who determine who is the class of stakeholder of the commons? Who care? Who care got the expertise because who know what he is talking about. Who went to, for example, in Cavallerizza, know the history of the place. Maybe not 100%, but 80% of people in there know the history of place, what can be and everything. If the key of the governance of commons instead be quantitative, how many people will be only elitist or expertise. So if you want to make part of this assembly, you must prove you're expert formally. No, informally, not formally. So the people in the assembly choose who the representatives.
Sorry to interrupt, but in 10 minutes we are going to be locked in the sense that the university will close. So if you could
So I write to the
get
question.
to the question,
and then-
because
And the question is, if instead of searching a quantitative parameters of governance, will we search the different and more difficult way to qualitize the participation of the commons and the social movement? So, if the social movement itself,
okay.
sorry.
No, I got it. I can just say it would be nice to be able to do that. I don't know how though. I mean, how do you do it? A cooptation, a self-appointment. The quality. We are very far away from measurements of the quality. We don't want really to measure the quality. I mean, next step would be to measure how beautiful is Mona Lisa. I mean, it's beautiful to me, it's horrible to someone else, you know, or maybe it's beautiful to everybody, certain things, but to make it objective is very
It's a
difficult.
sort of synthesis.
No, I think that, for example, it would be important to have a board of trustees for a commons trust that is not selected by political pressures, that is selected by certain kind of skills. So that should be a technocratic decision of who are the ones to do the running. From that point of view, there should be something like that. But there should be a political. So it's a mix that have to be fine-tuned. Yeah.
It's very complex.
Okay.
Vamos.
Vamos.
Thank you, everyone.